Hello everyone, you're welcome to this week's Tech Tuesdays webinar on calculating the value of data in your enterprise. I'm Brinda, your host for today's session, and today we have with us David Gaffney, Senior Principal from the IPS Data Governance and Privacy team. Before we start the session, let's go through some housekeeping tips. The webinar is for 1 hour, that includes a 15 minutes Q&A. You can post your queries in the Q&A box. Dial-in participants are muted for the entire session. The session is being recorded and will be available in the Informatica Support YouTube channel and the Success portal, where you'll also be able to download the slide deck. Please feel free to put in your feedback and suggestions for the session in the post-webinar survey. The Tech Tuesdays webinars are hosted within the Success portal, which is a micro-learning platform that offers free and unlimited learning to all registered users. This feature-rich platform was launched to help you learn and use Informatica products better. Here are a few important links that you can go over later that will help you in your product adoption journey with Informatica. Over to you, David. Thank you.
So thanks for the introduction. I'm David Gaffney, Senior Principal Consultant with IPS. And so I work at the front end of projects, really working on the overall business strategy, the use case, and again, data value, and really understanding the business use case around why we're doing projects in data governance. So we're going to go through today is really fundamentals of data value. We'll talk about the components that make it up. We'll look at a number of industries and how industries think differently about data value and what really drives their business. We'll talk about the concept of offense versus defense. So offense being information that helps you make money, do a better job for your customers, and then defense, which is really protecting yourself against things like lawsuits, audits, regulatory, and things like that. We'll get into a bit of the what I call dead data, and I'll explain that acronym a little bit later. It's a new one. And then we'll go through the techniques. So what are the requirements behind this? What does the community need to do to improve data value? And how can you carry that forward into a lasting program? We'll talk a bit about the plumbing. So enterprise data catalog, data asset analytics, a little bit of Axon, how these things can really help support and drive data value, but more importantly, measure it as it changes, hopefully for the better over time. And then at the end, we'll talk a bit about what we learned here, some additional resources you can look at to go forward, and hopefully get you started on your data value journey. So getting into some of the fundamentals of data value. So at Informatica, we have customers from all over the world, every industry, government entity, et cetera, and people value data in different ways. So our customers serve every industry, goods and services, in other cases, providing services to citizens, helping regulators manage their business, and so on. And so some of the industries I'm going to talk about are highlighted here, such as public sector, banking, energy, pharmaceuticals, insurance. Every industry is really data-driven. So you can't operate successfully without high-value, high-quality data. So I know sometimes you hear use cases like, well, here's a heavily data-driven use case. I think it's pretty much every use case at this point is data-driven. And it's all valuable data. But what is valuable to one company is not always the same as others. So as an example, you might have customer data that's very important to drive new business for a CPG firm, but in other cases, the customer is really about just managing the information behind them, not necessarily driving revenue, providing services in a different light. So it's all valuable, but some can be less valuable when it's not maintained well, when it's old, when it's dead data, as I'll talk about in a second. Some categories of information attract and retain customers, such as marketing lists, lists that you're getting from other organizations. Others are really around preventing loss and the defensive side as well. So we'll talk a bit about that and get into some detail because it really helps build your risk profile as well as your value profile going forward. So industries do value data pretty differently. And so I'm going to give some examples in here, similar to what I just showed on the last slide. But I think we've got some representation from all these different industries on the call today based on the signups. And so hopefully these can relate to some of the business cases you're looking at. So as an example, if we're looking at energy, in that market space, we've got grid management, power creation, power distribution, monitoring of that, regulatory reporting. So some use cases here that are pretty attractive from a data value perspective are looking at things like tuning the network, being able to manage things like surges in production, surges in consumption, being able to understand outage analysis better so that we don't have the same thing happen over and over again, and also being able to look at customer lists and things like that, which could also be valuable for data monetization. From a public sector perspective, we've got a lot of good use cases related to serving our citizens. So every state has public record access laws, FOIA requests. From a federal perspective, we have to be able to respond to those quickly. While that's not a creation of value, it's more of a defensive one, in that we have to supply that information by law and want to be efficient about it. Some revenue production areas are really around taxes, permitting, being able to run those processes more efficiently, because that's the data that actually drives revenue to bring into a public sector entity. Now, banking has a wealth of opportunities from a data management perspective, and so certainly day in the life activities like servicing accounts, managing your overall leverage, solvency requirements for various regulations in the US and Europe. And there's opportunities there for monetization. So thinking about things like your customer list, knowing all the individuals that hold mortgages with you would be very useful for folks that are selling mortgage insurance or other parallel entities to that. Assets under management have a direct impact on the revenue, the margins that you're supporting as a bank as well. So those are often very good targets for, I would say, offensive. Insurance, again, customer insight and retention are huge in the insurance industry. So every provider of P&C insurance, life insurance, are trying to swipe customers from the others. And so some of the things we want to look at there as good solid use cases are ways to hold on to your customers better, looking at lifetime value of a customer as they're initially brought into the company, so that, starting with life insurance, moving to P&C, maybe moving to other properties, short-term life insurance or short-term disability, things like that as well. So I think these are all really good opportunities for insurance companies. There's also efficiency related to things like a claims adjudication, being much more efficient with the way you process claims and being able to get payments back to your customers. This kind of information then ensures longer customer lifetime value, because people stick with you when you're able to perform in that way. So again, another solid use case for data value there. And then finally, life sciences. So a lot of the data, tons of data, terabytes of data being collected for innovation, R&D, managing the regulatory cycle. And then once drugs are created or therapies are created, being able to manage the supply chain to be able to efficiently distribute them to clinics, hospitals, et cetera, in an efficient manner that supports their overall quality. So there's certainly a lot of opportunity in life sciences, and some of the core use cases we see here are things like ability to manage an audit from the FDA or other regulatory, certainly time to market, being able to more quickly speed up the R&D process to get things from the original source molecule out to something that can be tested in a clinic and then finally pushed out to market more efficiently than in the past. So again, these all become data value targets, but really in general, they are core business use cases that you want to support for your industry going forward. Now we get into offense versus defense. And so I've phrased this a couple different times here, and just as a way that we look at different information that drives the enterprise. So offense is really about value generators. So these are things that bring income into the organization, really help, drive revenue, drive our margins, and so on. And so mixing metaphors a little bit here, we've got the football play, but also the piggy banks. So some generators would include customer acquisition. So being able to find and bring on board new customers. So this is for retail organization, bringing in new buyers, new folks to ensure new people investing in your investment products, new customers at a bank. Could also be around managing customer account data for revenue and retention. So again, thinking about the insurance use case, a banking use case, the better you can service your customers, the more likely they are to stay on and provide long-term value and not have to reinvest that customer acquisition cost. So this is a good area to focus on as well. Customer behavior, so we can certainly monetize this. And so you look at organizations, consumer packaged good companies that are taking data from Nielsen, IRI, organizations like that with customer sentiment. You may also have your own customer list that you can sell and maybe share with others, of course, within CCPA requirements, but be able to share that information. And it becomes very valuable to have an existing base where you already know their customer sentiment based on a particular industry or product they're purchasing. From an underwriting perspective, so this would be looking at financial services, insurance, investments, being able to look at the overall investments you're making and what the margin is, profit margin for that, something like being able to process claims and determine which insureds are going to be the most valuable to you as an insurance company that are bringing in more than you're spending out on them. So profit margin analysis is key. And again, this is in the green. These are all revenue producers for you. So you want to balance these against protective data or defensive data, such as things like managing PHI, HIPAA-related data for a healthcare organization, for an insurance company that has PHI. You may have financial regulatory information, rate reviews, solvency reviews that you have to do. Again, this may be some of this data, but it's about having it accessible to be able to produce it for these audits in a relatively short amount of time. So again, this helps you keep the business going, helps you avoid fines, and so on. Commonly litigated data. So this is going to be, of course, very industry specific. So if you're a product company, a consumer product company, it may be around potential health claims, someone getting sick from one of your products. From an automobile or a trucking manufacturer, it could be injuries related to product defects, things like that you may get litigated on. Again, these are things you want to focus on as strong data to manage, because if you need to get at it very quickly and produce a result so that you can fight off a lawsuit or defend yourself appropriately, that's going to be key. So again, these are providing focus areas for you to manage this information. So what's blocking access to your data? What's blocking your success? So your information could be in a bad state. It could potentially be dead. And the way we've spelled this out is really, taking a page from the old records management, rot, redundant, outdated, transient data is a similar concept. If it's difficult to access, trapped in older systems, hard to find and access, and you can't find the right expert, then you're really not going to be able to get to this data to use it for the information you need, for the value computations that you want to build. Efficiency and accuracy may be lacking. So you want to find out, when did it go bad? Why is it so hard to fix this data? If it's inefficient to get to, then you might never end up having it on a good report where you can manage it. Could be archaic and irrelevant. This would be more in the records management area and having something that's 16 years old, nothing that should have already been disposed of, but it's still coming up in your analysis, and this is blocking access to finding it as a good data source, something that's very valuable. So if you have a lot of out-of-date information, this is going to skew your numbers, and you want to make sure to avoid that. And finally, it could be decaying. And so by decaying, I don't mean ancient necessarily as in archaic, but not having community involvement, data can go stale. And so this means reviewing it, making sure it's current, providing reviews of that information, feedback when it is out of date or low quality. These are the kinds of things you want to be able to manage so that you can bring your community into the mix, make sure you have strong data that's feeding the numbers that you're trying so hard to capture. Okay, so we've got the business requirements down. We've got some good direction as far as the use cases we want to support, the types of data we want to go after to manage value. So we want to get into more about the product set, the Informatica stack, and how it supports these things. If you look at the requirements then driving this is we want to be able to gain insight into data usage, user adoption. So what kind of data is in demand by which group of users, who are the top contributors. So this is something that you can look at through EDC and Axon, be able to see who's actually pushing data into the model, who the influencers are, who are the SMEs that people go after when they're trying to manage information. We also want to be able to spot trends and uncover usage patterns to ensure relevant data assets are available. So if someone continually requests a piece of data that they're going to need to drive a particular metrics report, we want to be able to get them that without them having to find some way around it, some sort of sneaker net method to capture that information. We want to make sure that data is profiled and managed appropriately within the product stack. We want to be able to build best practices for data-driven decision-making, and this means being able to understand the usage patterns, what order people are going after data, if they're having challenges identifying things like business terminology and glossary. When we've got a good best practice, let's build that into a job aid so that people can have better understanding of it, be more efficient the next time. Usually you have an iterative approach when you're building out a data model where you've got an early pilot to bring some success to the methodology and then expand that to others going forward. So you want to have a feedback loop for that, and I'll kind of close with that discussion. We want to be able to remediate instances of poor data, also low data usage, low data adoption. There's a lot of things. It could be that the dead data discussion from before, where they have trouble getting access to it, takes 2 to 3 weeks to get at a particular data source to get the right credentials. That may be blocking access. Maybe that means we need to push some of that data into a more consumable data mart, as an example. So not necessarily looking at the product set to support that, but rather giving you the information to feed back to the IT enterprise to say, let's kind of unlock this data because it's got a lot of value for our users. And we want to be able to expand and empower that data-driven decision-making. So the more tools we can put in the hands closer to end users, to those executive decision makers, is going to be valuable. So we don't want to have it always have to be a multi-week process to drill back and find the right subject matter experts to get the right data for that decision making. So the more that we can put closer to the hands of those people that have the access to be able to do that expert analysis. And then maximizing that data asset value. So similar to before, if we find a high value piece of data or a data set or a data mart or something like that, we want to be able to make sure that that is readily available, well cataloged, understandable by the key users. We want to have organizations be able to focus on their most valued assets. So what's the most important stuff they manage day to day? Let's get that out there for others to consume and share in some sort of data marketplace versus having it hidden. And then finally, we want to drive better data value with knowledge, collaboration, and usage. So the more people we can have with their hands in the model, helping to improve the process, helping to improve the value of it, is only going to make things better as we go forward. And so we want to have mechanisms in place for supporting that. So you can see we're tracing the requirements from the high-level business requirements to high-level technical, and now getting to lower-level technical requirements, functional things that we need to look for. So questions we need to answer to support all those things that we've gotten to so far. So who's using which asset, which feature, that's useful to know. Adoption rate, these are things like how many people are logging in, who's browsing content. Again, we want to watch the trends for this to see it improve over time. We want to see what people are looking for, most valuable data sources, as we talked about a little bit. So what's the most useful information? Maybe we should put a little more effort into those top searches and make sure that data is the most curated. Moving forward, it helps us give a target as we go along and build out the model. We certainly want to know some of these who questions. So who's curating assets, which user groups need more attention, which user groups are having trouble, who's modifying, who's scanning information, especially when it relates to things like sensitive data sources. We want to make sure that we've got the right people involved in that over time. You're definitely going to see certain folks in your enterprise that are the top contributors. So there's always going to be 3 or 4 A-team players that are always looking to add more value. You want to get them involved as much as you can, but also have them be the ones to guide new people as they come on board, so they understand the right methods to catalog information, the right way to build value to it long term. So it's all about building that user community going forward. How this then feeds into some of the key capabilities is we want to make sure this insight, we want to be able to get this insight out of the metrics, being able to monitor activities. So which things did they get at? How often were they going there? Are there patterns we can identify and thereby trends that guide us down the road to that? And then also improving the data values. So once we've got some ideas on this flow, then we can start to build that extra data value into the model. We don't want it, again, going stale, becoming dead data over time. We want to make sure we've got the right people involved and they're contributing in a good way. We also want to be able to capture misuse of data. So we should be able to see who's browsing what when, and not that there's any intentional misuse, but there could be searches against sensitive data that maybe shouldn't be happening. Maybe it's the wrong user group has access to particular sets of data. That's something we look at, making sure we've got the right policy applied to information and making sure we've got the right data steward zoning it. So when people try to get at information, we can maybe stop that before it happens. Or again, if it becomes a common trend, maybe that's information we need to lock down further as well. So this is all some good insight that's coming out of the platform and, speaking in general, but now if we're getting into real details about EDC advanced analytics, about Axon policy management, these things come together to really support this model going forward. Okay, so let's get down to the EDC data asset analytics and the data value calculator. So I think this will help really kind of explain the different components of this, how we measure these counts, how we put value on data within EDC itself. So a resource is the content managed in your organization. So this means things like databases, taxonomies, file systems, business definitions, data quality scores. These are all the resources that we manage in data asset analytics. And so resources have value on their own, but their value increases depending on how well governed they are. So it holds the intrinsic value of data in your organization. The focus of the data really depends on the use case you're looking to support. So as an example, if we're looking for all policy management information, that might be the focus for the first use case, or all investment broker account information might be the focus for another use case. So being able to have some focus on these will help sort of quantify the value versus having it maybe muddied a little bit from an enterprise perspective. But eventually you'll get there in having most of your key data assets managed at the enterprise level. So to put a number on that, and you'll see we put a dollar value on the data assets in the tool itself. So there are many studies on this around what the value of data actually is. I think a pretty good thumbnail that we've seen is some percentage of annual revenue. So as a $1 billion corporation, if you have $200 million assigned to the value of your data, that does make sense, depending on which part of the organization you're looking at. So it could be customer acquisition and retention drives your business, so that has the most value. Operational data, serving your customers well, has some value, some percentage of that as well. But we want to put an overall number on it because this just helps us put a baseline as to the value of the data going forward, and you'll see that in the demo. So from a methodology perspective, we want to look at things that are more or less structured. And so in my mind, something like a Tableau report is typically more structured than some of the raw level of a data lake feed. And so you can put different dollar values on those to help sort of show the value improves over time and where you really want to be focusing a lot of that curation activity. So that's the base resource. Enrichment then, in our definition, is really productive curation against your critical information. So these are things like adding a description, a title, classification, all against a particular set of data so that we can have business context to it. And so some of these things might be, if you've got a raw data field that is, QXY17, in reality, that is the policy header record. And so being able to add that definition to it, being able to add that something is a broker transaction versus just a dollar figure, also adds value to that raw piece of data, the key resource that you're managing. We also look at feature usage, in EDC, which is using particular functions within EDC to browse reviews, browse lineage, look at data quality scores, impact analysis, summary views, and so things like that. So as your expert users, get better and better at using EDC, the number of features that they're using actually contributes to the overall data value, because we can see how well they're able to explore the model, trace activities, trace lineage through the model itself. Then collaboration, pretty interesting, because this is where we can start to capture, facilitate user interactions. So in our case, it's really questions and answers and reviews. So we put numbers on these as well. We call it the data water cooler effect, which is being able to just put this out into more of a social context so that people can ask a question about a particular source of data. Somebody can answer it. Someone can flag a particular data source as a 1-star, which might facilitate a discussion as to why is it a poor quality data, get it fixed, get it re-curated, and then brought up to a 5-star, which means something that people should pay attention to and start to use in reports, and so on. And that's the kind of thing that might end up making its way into a data marketplace somewhere down the line once we've enhanced that raw data. So we see it as really building up the value of the data over time. These guys are multipliers: enrichment, feature usage, and collaboration. This is the base that we're starting from. And so we anticipate seeing a curve like this. There are certainly going to be ups and downs to it depending on levels of activity, but you have your base data inventory here, and then it's through enrichment, through usage, and through collaboration, we get an overall growing value over time. Okay, so I want to show a little bit of this in the EDC, the DAA component of EDC, specifically looking at the data value calculation. So before you plug in any values, you have a view like this. There's adoption activity happening, and enrichment activity, collaboration, and so on. But until you put some numbers in here by these sliders, you don't really have anything in the data value. So if you haven't gotten into this yet, in your own instance, this is probably what you're going to see when you first launch it. Now, I'm not showing a true demo here. It's really just some screenshots I grabbed because there was a lot of what-if analysis we did behind the scenes to build these up. But I think you'll kind of get the flow of it as I go through this. So as an example, if I pop up this resource value calculator, what you would see is a list of all your different resource types. And so in this instance, I had JDBC content, I had Power Center lineage, I had Tableau reports, SAP, a bunch of other things in here. So as an example, if I just grab a couple quick ones here to show a build, I put a $20 value on assets from Power Center and JDBC, it starts to build a number here based on resource value. So that was a quick sample. I didn't really like those numbers, and so what I did is I kind of messed around with them a little bit to give a little more interest to the flow here. But before we do that, some of the things we also tweaked in the model is within the enrichment value. These are some of the things we mean by enrichment. So I talked about these a little bit earlier, a couple slides ago, adding a business description, adding a business term to a particular asset adds value to it. And again, this is relative value based on what we already captured from the raw resource itself. So I'm saying incrementally, another, $10 better based on the components we add to this. We look at the feature usage. Again, this is how my expert users are getting around the tool. So start putting some numbers on here for a data quality score, having lineage and impact captured, having maybe specify if it's a key, foreign key. All of these things can add value. there's a complex set of flow you do to this just to kind of tweak it and see if the numbers are looking right. And again, it's not necessarily a raw $10 value, but rather incremental against the base value of the data itself. And then finally, the collaboration activities. So questions, answers, and reviews. So that's really what we're scoring here, is how many people asked a question, posted a question, how many responded to it, reviews. As you'll see in the model I'm showing here, we didn't have a lot of activity and collaboration, so it ends up being a bit of a flat number. We also tweaked some of the other raw resource value to add a couple other data sources so that we can see the overall value of this went up. So now looking at the numbers here, these came off of my enrichment, feature usage, collaboration. So collaboration is not much, a relative value of $400 better, but the enrichment over here was actually quite a bit. And so if we looked at setting a resource value of 375K for this particular data area, like that's a pretty solid number. This is something you would sort of back into and arrive at from the overall value of this particular business subset. Now, the enrichment value is, again, relative, but if we're adding terms, adding titles, building lineage here, I could see that this would really improve the overall value of this data, make it more accessible to others. We got to this enrichment through using the features and through using collaboration. So typically this is going to be the larger of the other numbers. As you can see, if we look at my base value here, having extended it now by maybe 50, 55%, the data value has improved because of the usage of this. And so again, I think this is a pretty good snapshot we can give to our overall project sponsors to say, we've incrementally improved this data 55, 58% over time because we are actively using this. We can see there's growing adoption of the product set, et cetera. You can also, this button here will let you combine the charts. So just we can see an overall trend of information going along here. So we had a lot of early activity here. And if you back up, we can see that it was heavy enrichment up front, which is great. That means maybe in our first pilot activity, we had a lot of people working on it and then slacked off a little bit, but then we have an overall growth pattern as the resource value grows and as people continue to use it. We don't want to see it flatten out because that means we're not getting a lot of user adoption and enrichment going forward. So this is a pretty good trend, and I think would be pretty common to what you would see in your enterprise as long as we've got adoption moving forward. Okay, so let's wrap things up. So really looking at the end-to-end process of what we went through today, we want to be able to understand how to build out this program, use the data value calculator to help us guide moving forward. So if we look at what we went through, establishing that target, I'll build this out, establishing the target that we're looking for. So which business domain are we focused on? Where are we going to find the most interesting information related to the valuation activity? The baseline then is really about having a good understanding of the current value of data, whether it's a percentage of the revenue from this particular area or some other measurement. The analysis then is really on enrichment, improvement of the data over time, how we, by adding business definitions and lineage and ratings and so on, really help to improve that data. We want to get buy-in from the teams that we're working with to say, yeah, that looks like a good improvement. That's a 10% improvement. That's a 20% improvement in our data. That actually makes it more valuable. That's all going to be part of the communication strategy. So working with our sponsors, working with the teams from a line of business perspective, get that data back to them. Given that we've got the base analytics dashboards as well as data value can show incremental improvement over time as we build out the model. So getting the teams to understand this, really buy into it, and even enabling them to work with the sliders, working with the measurements, so they can also do some what-if analysis on the tool. And this will be a new concept for a lot of people, but once we get used to this, we start having our monthly meetings, our weekly meetings, putting this data in the hands of the key business users. It's always going to make it easier for them too, and I think they'll get excited about it. Definitely as a tool for improved adoption over time. So there's a lot more information available on this. So we have our Tech Tuesday from last year when we introduced this new feature. There's a lot of great information there. We have an overall learning path in the Success Portal for this, as well as a lot of great information from Informatica World. So definitely had to leave an ad for this. So, there's a lot of good content. If you weren't able to attend Informatica World last week, or 2 weeks ago, sorry, then you can get some good information there, review the keynotes, etc. A lot of great content. So we're going to open it up to Q&A now with myself and Kwan and Ratish. And so we're happy to take your questions.
Everyone, if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A box. We'll try and answer them. Over to you, David.
Yep, still waiting for stuff to come in. But I would say just a couple things is, for those of you active Informatica customers that are using this feature already, or, heavily into EDC, but not yet into analytics, we definitely want to hear from you. So definitely reach out to your account managers, get in touch with us. We're very interested in helping develop more of these use cases to build more of kind of an industry-centric view of these. So yeah, very excited to to hear from you guys. So definitely let us know.
Thank you, David.
Some other
questions.
Oh, go ahead.
So the first question goes like this: Can I access the metrics shown in the dashboard?
Yes. So some of the things that we've looked at is I didn't really go into this in the presentation, but in the analytics dashboard, we also have a set of reports that generate those metrics, and so you can always generate the reports to drill into the details of what drove the login metrics, the Q&A and rating metrics and other things like that. So you can get all of the low-level detail behind that if you need to slice and dice.
Thank you, David. Another question: Can you elaborate more on offense and defense?
Oh, sure. So offense and defense. And so the offense side of it is really what makes you money as an organization. So, if we're thinking about, sales content for consumer packaged goods, new enrollments for insurance or financial services, new account opening and banking, these are all the things that really drive revenue, positive revenue for an organization. The defensive side is, sort of protective. So being able to respond to an audit, being able to respond to an e-discovery request, things like that, that's really setting up for a defensive stance on data management. And usually it's a balance between both, but for the early use cases, it's usually better to focus on one or the other before bringing in both sides.
Thank you, David. There is another question. Is it possible to change from $ to euro?
Yes. So the two main currencies in the tool itself right now are euro and dollars. And so you can change that in the display as part of the configuration for the analytics.
Thank you. Another question: Can I change the time range for the chart?
Yes, I didn't drill into this as much, but there is a range from 1 month, 3 months, year, etc. So you can change the time span on those charts. As an example, if you're just getting started, you might want it to be more granular initially, but then over time, if you have a multi-year project, you might want to stretch out those timelines. So for all of the charts we showed, you can change that time range.
Sure. Thank you, David. Another question, how to access data that supports the charts?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I answered that a little bit for the first question. So under the analytics reporting, you can get the raw data that generates those charts. And so as one example, if you wanted to look at number of logins as an example for individuals getting into the tool, you can generate the report with all the raw detail behind that, and you can export it as a CSV if you want to do your own additional slice and dice on it. But all the raw data that generates the charts is available through the analytics reporting tab.
Thank you, David. Let's wait for some more time before we can end the session. Everyone, please post your questions if you have any in the Q&A box. We'll try and answer them. Yeah, we got one. Do you have to have DPM up and running to use this?
So data privacy management, no, you don't. This is on its own, independent, just within EDC, the analytics component of EDC.
Thank you, David. While we wait, I would like to call out that this recording will be shared to you in YouTube. You will find us in the Informatica Support YouTube channel, also in the Success Portal, where you will be able to download the slide deck. Also, there is a post-webinar survey. Please let us know your thoughts about the session, and if you have any suggestions for future sessions, please let us know through the post-webinar survey. Yeah, there is another question. Can I control access to the DAA?
So yes, for individual users, you have to grant access to that. So not every user has access to analytics, and then you have to also be an administrator level to be able to do the sliders as I was showing. So there's two components to that. One is live being able to control and enter dollar values against those sliders. And then as an administrator, you can also go in and determine, as I mentioned, like the currency format, as well as the tags that it's looking at to generate the numbers. So that's also part of the administrator component. We had one more question I wanted to answer about licensing. So you already have it. If you have EDC, you already have advanced analytics as part of it. But it is a matter of configuration to turn it on and establish the schema that it uses to collect the metrics and so on, but it's already there as part of EDC.
Thank you, David. Let's wait for one more minute before we can end the session. We'll address if you have any questions in the meantime.
Okay, yeah, so one final comment. Again, thanks everyone for attending. We did want to note that we have an API available as well to extract the same data used to generate the content for the analytics. So if you want to extend, build your own reporting cubes based on it as well, all of that data is available through the APIs to pull out of the EDC repository.
Thank you, David. There's another question. Is there a way to apply filters on the analytics report?
So David,
So
if
there
I
are,
may, yes,
sure,
absolutely.
yeah.
Are filters that you can apply on the reports.
Thank you. Yeah, looks like we have answered most of the questions that came in. If we have failed to answer any of your questions, we'll get back to you right after this session. Thanks for joining. Thanks once again to David for spending some time for this wonderful session. Also, Kwan and Ratish for joining as panelists. Thanks, everyone. See you on our next Tech Tuesdays. Bye.